Hey everyone, I wanted to go over the new and exciting news that we got for Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak that's set to release on both the Nintendo Switch and on PC this summer. And that's the fact that after many weeks of basically getting absolutely nothing substantial for Monster Hunter Rise's Sunbreak upcoming release, Director Suzuki finally went ahead and took to Twitter to provide us with something a little bit more interesting that has kind of opened the lid to a bevy of type of conversations regarding what type of monsters we'll actually be seeing in Sunbreak. In the Japanese tweet, they actually mentioned, "I'm Director Suzuki, the director. Starting today, we'll be sending out keywords on a regular basis. Today's keyword is royal creatures." Now, this is obviously the Japanese tweet. Once it's translated, the wording can be changed, and we find out that actually is the case when you take a closer look at the Western version of the tweet from the official Monster Hunter Twitter account. It actually reads, "Hello everyone, I'll be revealing some key phrases from today on. The first one is Kingdom Creatures." This is of course from Director Suzuki, the director for Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. So the key shift here and the key changes are the fact that in the Japanese one it actually reads Royal Creatures, and in the Western one it reads as Kingdom Creatures. So clearly there's some type of translation differences here, and this is what's kind of sparked a lot of conversation already, where essentially two big key differences have derived from the translation, either error or deliberate translation. The first one entails a lot of story nuance essentially being added into what these posts are actually trying to say, basically saying that because Randine's sister in the trailer, at the very least in the English trailer, she mentions it is a royal matter, and then the Japanese post it mentions royal creatures. They're actually saying that the fact that the monsters are being shown from Elgato have something to do with the fact that maybe the kingdom itself is actually behind some of the events taking place at Sunbreak. Would that actually imply that this kingdom is so powerful enough to be able to change monsters' behaviors and actually get them to act in their very own way and actually be able to control them in that certain matter? That's kind of hard to say, because from what we know so far regarding all of the history for the Monster Hunter franchise in general, we know that humans, or even Wyverians for that matter, do not have the power to essentially control monsters in that regard. That's not really what they're capable of at this point in time. Many quests and multiple games have had you dealing with changing some of their behavior in a key situation, but it's not something that you can outright tell a monster what to do. In fact, humans are so inept in that regard that one of the reasons why Monster Hunter World was built the way it was because humans were so concerned about what these monsters were doing in this new world, in this new area. So they just basically wanted to figure out what was going on, because they were just so limited in knowledge. So they don't necessarily have the power to be able to tell these monsters what to do. So if that idea would imply that this new kingdom of Elgato, or this outpost that is part of this kingdom, well, where Randine's sister is from and where Randine is also from as well, they have a power to control monsters or like actually get them to do their bidding, I think that's a hell of a stretch, realistically speaking, and I don't think that's close to what they're actually trying to imply. But again, that's just one theory. Other theories that I've actually seen people tossing around is that in Monster Hunter Stories 2, we already have royal monsters already being mentioned in that game, and they come in the form of monsters that are essentially optional for you to be able to engage with. These are monsters that are more powerful. They're expected to be a little bit older than typical monsters, because they live longer, they're more powerful, and essentially they're like optional. They're usually sleeping, you can choose to engage with them, and they're actually something of a challenge for like new hunters, or like, you know, again, the new trainers that you're dealing with in Monster Hunter Stories 2. Interestingly enough, in the Akuma quest for Monster Hunter Rise, you already have something similar like that happening, where in the Akuma quest, you actually get to fight a Rajang, I believe. That is what the quest goal is, for you to be able to take down a Rajang and be able to acquire the materials to be able to make the Akuma layered armor. But interestingly enough, at the peak of the Shrine Ruins, which is the map that you're loaded into to do that very specific quest, there's a second Rajang that is actually sleeping at the top of the peak. If you choose to engage with that Rajang and you actually take it down, first and foremost, great job, but that's also something like an Apex Rajang. He's not called that at all, but he does have boosted parameters, he does have more health, and he definitely hits harder as well than the typical Rajang that you're going to be fighting at the bottom of the typical event quest. That Rajang that is on top sleeping, he never wakes up naturally. You have to go there, bother him, wake him up, and then bring him to the bottom if you want to engage with him. He's never going to like move around naturally. You have to choose to like actually engage with him if you want him to like essentially move around. So what we're dealing with is, like I mentioned before with Monster Hunter Stories 2, it is the same royal idea. A monster that is more powerful than the typical monsters that are surrounding the area, that is optional if you choose to engage with it if you decide to wake it up. Monster Hunter Stories 2 has that same mechanic, and in Monster Hunter Rise, we've already seen him being introduced in that very specific Akuma event quest. So could this actually be one of those things where they're talking about kingdom creatures, monsters that are essentially optional that you're going to be able to fight? Because again, I think kingdom creatures is just a translation error or like the localization version of what they're actually calling them, and it could be just like they're royal creatures. And in Japanese, it ultimately boils down to a monster that is optional for you to be able to fight if you so desire. That's at the very least what the wording has always meant in these Japanese games. I also think something else that adds a little bit of more credibility to that theory is the fact that apex monsters in Monster Hunter Rise in Japanese are actually referred to as nushi, which nushi monsters essentially means lord, like Lord Mitsuzune or whatever. That's the actual term of like apex in Japanese. So like kingdom creatures would just be a deviation of what apex monsters are in Elgato, essentially this new outpost that you're going to be visiting for this brand new kingdom. It could ultimately, again, mean that it's just a story-based thing that, like I mentioned at the top of the video, you know, this brand new kingdom does seem to have some sort of power over monsters. Remember that the faces of both the moon and the sun will be playing a key role in the story at the end of the day. We don't necessarily know what those roles will be, but we do know that at the very least, the moon has been heavily focused in both the story trailers that we've seen so far, and obviously Sunbreak, the sun being at the title, means that there's going to be some sort of story flip, and we're going to be able to see the opposite of whatever the moon effect is, showcase whenever it is during the daytime, if they choose to do it in the 9-day cycle. But now with this idea of like kingdom creatures or royal monsters / royal creatures, then we might really actually end up dealing with just what ultimately they'll end up calling apexes for Elgato. I think it would be a little bit of a disappointment, realistically speaking, if they just choose to change the name around like they did with Deviants to Apexes. Remember how that was just a name change and nothing necessarily like all that important. I don't think ultimately Apexes really make that much of a difference. You know, we treat them as kind of like the same monsters. If they were just considered a subspecies, probably that would be even better. I understand that the whole like camera village being attacked and the rampage have something to do with that, therefore they turn apex. I know that has some sort of meaning to the story of the game. Perhaps again, there's some mixture of the two. You know, again, you're going to a new area, you're dealing with a new kingdom, they have to give it a name, you know, just so they could put damage boosters and damage parameters to these monsters. It makes sense in that regard, but ultimately, I think just dealing with subspecies, for me at the very least, it's a little bit a cleaner slate to be dealing with subspecies, understanding that this specific subspecies is more dangerous and more powerful than the original, you know, basic version of a monster. But that's about all the information that I wanted to go over. A lot of speculation has been turned up because of this very specific post from director Suzuki, and that is great. Ultimately, I think that is adding to the conversation of Sunbreak. I don't necessarily think I've seen a lot of conversation after the launch week of Monster Hunter Rise on PC being all that relevant. I do see the game is very popular, at the very least on Twitch, with like Korean and Japanese streamers. That's good to see. But when it comes to the Western audience, I think the game did very well on Steam the first week. The second week was a little bit all right, but then like the conversation itself just hasn't necessarily kept up, and that was kind of expected. It's not going to have that big long haul that Rise did on the Nintendo Switch throughout the entirety of the summer, up until Capcom decided to pretty much stop supporting the game with really meaningful updates, which is one of the biggest criticisms that we've had for the game so far. Hopefully, when it comes to Sunbreak, we do continue to get those, you know, updates from information. And again, I do think that if Capcom is going to choose to continue just drop little Easter eggs and little bits of information here and there, I think is beneficial. But I would definitely love them to see them do a little bit more important, like again, a big, you know, trailer event, another Capcom Presents, one of those type of things. They keep mentioning that we're going to see something around in April or like late March or something along those lines in the spring. I would love it for it to be sooner than later. But at the end of the day, you know, it's just something that we're just at their whims and mercy. Ultimately, we're waiting for more information, and you know the game is still going to be coming out in a couple of months. So it just kind of sucks to wait. If you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.